This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Let's take some time to talk about a major shift playing out in the U.S. workforce, a surge of high-profile unionizing and union activity.
For the first time, employees at a San Francisco Starbucks have voted to unionize.
Workers at the New York City location of outdoor clothing and equipment seller REI have voted in favor of joining a union.
The nation now has nearly 100,000 workers protesting what they consider to be unfair wages.
Today, Amazon workers at a Staten Island warehouse successfully voted to unionize.
To the first union in American history.
From food to media to retail industries, it seems like everyone's getting in on the collective action. For a quick refresher, a labor union is an organized group of workers who make decisions about working conditions, from retirement plans to insurance to wages. They bargain with the employer on behalf of its employees. And unions are also making a bit of a comeback in national popularity. A recent Gallup poll found that 71% of Americans approve of labor unions. That's the highest percentage recorded since 1965. And according to data from last year, there was near unanimous approval among Democrat respondents, reaching a record high of 90%. So what's behind all this sudden union activity, and is this really a sign of lasting change? To unpack that, first let's look at just how unusual this unionizing is for the US.
Our social welfare system is employer provided. And what I mean by that is we get our health care, we get our private pensions, etc., through our employers. In other countries, a lot of that comes through government, through the state. And that sets up a system in the United States that gives corporations a heavy incentive to stop workers from forming unions.
Union membership rates have actually been on a steady decline since the 1960s. At their height, nearly a third of Americans were in a union. By 2021, that's down to about 10%. That drop is particularly stark for the private sector. While about a third of public sector jobs have consistently belonged to unions, private sector jobs have declined, down to about 6% last year. There are a few reasons for why this could be. Some industries where unions dominated in the 1950s, like manufacturing, declined over the next few decades. But also over time, employers gained newfound empowerment in disrupting any organizing. A lot of that has to do with the changing political winds in the 1970s and 80s.
In the 1970s, employers are now competing with corporations all over the globe. And so where are they going to be able to make a profit margin? So what you see in the 1970s is that corporations begin to bend and break labor law at a whole new level. The number of unfair labor practice charges against employers in the 1970s doubles. And you also see the rise in this time of the anti-union consultant industry.
But we cannot compare labor management relations in the private sector with government. Government cannot close down the assembly line.
In 1981, things came to a head with the strike of federally employed air traffic controllers. Here, former President Ronald Reagan threatened to fire the workers and ban them from the industry unless they returned to work within 48 hours. Now, to be clear, a strike is technically illegal for air traffic controllers in the US without going through the proper steps, and the process to authorize a strike is purposefully complicated to keep airlines from shutting down. But it wasn't until this moment that those rules were enforced on such a massive scale. Reagan ended up firing and banning more than 11,000 workers who refused to cross picket lines.
The fact that Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controller sent a message that workers, both in the public and private sector, did not really have a full freedom to form unions and to exercise their full labor rights. So here's the federal government, which is supposed to be protecting workers' freedom to form unions. It chilled any radicalism. It chilled any effort to effectively build their movement.
Well, it's a necessary evil, let's put it that way. You know, you have to work.
What else you gonna do? It's a living.
In the following years, the average number of major strikes per year plummeted. Employers became emboldened to replace striking workers, And so the downward trend of union membership continued to the record lows we've seen in the past couple of years. So what turned the tide in recent years? Well, you probably already have a good guess.
Think about the early days of the pandemic. Remember, we celebrated essential workers. We banged pots and pans for them. You know, we waved at the delivery truck drivers, right? And then we watched as all those essential workers went back to the same kind of dead-end jobs, and people really saw how unjust our system is.
Going into 2021, companies started recording record profits as the economy came roaring back from pandemic lows, growing to the fastest full-year rise since 1984. There was also a historic job shortage as employers struggled to recruit and retain workers. This combination of things made a perfect storm for unionization efforts. For workers, suddenly, the bargaining ball was in their court. That's especially true for industries dependent on so-called essential workers, like retail or food and restaurants. Though there is a visible jump in the number of workplaces starting to organize, that number doubled from 2020 to 2021, that doesn't necessarily translate to unionization success. Earlier this year, 2 Apple stores filed paperwork to begin organizing, but after Apple hired anti-union lawyers, sent out warnings against unionizing, and eventually gave a pay raise to retail workers, the momentum to unionize fizzled out. 4 Amazon warehouses have recently held elections to form a union, but all but 1 have decisively voted against it. Those losses include a second warehouse on Staten Island in New York, and Starbucks is embroiled in a number of legal battles after allegedly firing workers for organizing unions and being accused of shutting down stores that successfully voted to unionize. In the US, it's a long, long road from generating momentum for union efforts to actually winning that victory. Big corporations are doubling up efforts to slow down that momentum. There's been a lot of media attention on how companies like Amazon and Starbucks use union-busting techniques and whether it's even legal. National correspondent Ben Shimiso looked into how union busting works and even took a trip to his local Starbucks to investigate more.
Hi, Christian. This Starbucks in Chicago's Hyde Park neighborhood may look no different from any of the other 15,000 stores in the US. But as a new union location, it is part of a growing organizing movement. A movement that's growing so fast it is prompting Starbucks to engage in what experts call an unprecedented union-busting campaign.
So this is my place. Yeah, lots of also union posters and stuff. It's our living room.
Jasper Booth Hodges lives 5 minutes away from the Union store in Hyde Park, where he used to work.
I have worked 40 hours a week for over 2 years at this company. I am one of the main openers.
The former barista says for the most part he loved his job.
I had such good rapport with so many customers.
Then last month he says he was fired in retaliation for leading the union push.
The fact that I was a really active part of the union organizing committee meant that they were going to find anything they could to get rid of me.
Starbucks denies that, telling Newsy Booth Hodges was terminated for violations of the company's time and attendance policies. Nationwide, over 230 locations have voted to join the Starbucks Workers United Union since last December, 6 of them here in Chicago. In total, nearly 3/4 of all votes cast have been in favor of unionizing. Labor experts say the speed and success of the movement is unheard of.
There's just no historical comparison, to what they have achieved by winning election after election after election.
But Starbucks is fighting tooth and nail to squash it, arguing that unions are disruptive to its relationship with employees. Meanwhile, Starbucks Workers United tells Newsy the coffee chain has fired over 85 pro-union workers.
I remember saying, I've been here for 13 years. You can't even explain to me why I'm being separated or provide me any details.
When Sam Amato was fired last month after 13 years on the job, all his colleagues at his store near Buffalo walked out in solidarity. This TikTok video of the incident, posted by the union, has been seen nearly 30 million times. A month later, Amato and his former colleagues are still on strike, picketing at the store every day.
So it just makes me a little emotional thinking about it, but they've been so incredibly supportive.
Starbucks has been racking up hundreds of labor violation complaints at the National Labor Relations Board, a federal enforcement agency. Last week, the NLRB said Starbucks has been illegally withholding wages and benefits from thousands of union workers. In response, Starbucks is accusing the agency of being biased and colluding with union organizers to rig elections. For labor expert John Logan, the problem lies with weak union protection laws that are too easy for giant corporations to ignore.
The penalties for violating the law are not sufficient deterrent and, frankly, not sufficient punishment, for companies who are egregious lawbreakers like Starbucks.
Back in Chicago, Booth Hodges is appealing his termination.
So you're fighting against Starbucks about your termination, but do you want your job back?
I do plan on going back if I get reinstated, but, regardless of that, this is so much bigger than just me getting reinstated or not. This is, about letting corporations know that they can't get away with this, that they need to be held accountable when they break labor laws.
Ben Chamisso, Newsy, Chicago.